The sheaf of papers, I had found it under the ancient flooring that I pulled up to make into a fire, intrigued me at once. The lonely cabin, untenanted but with open door, had offered shelter, the blaze on the hearth light and warmth, and now I had stumbled upon something to read. I could forget the night outside, the snow that thickened and lashed itself into a blizzard, the woods in which I had lost myself. Sitting on a broken stool before the fireplace, I spread the frayed, faded documents upon my knee. The largest item was an ancient paperbacked book or pamphlet, the size of an old-fashioned dime novel. Its cover was limp and discolored, tinted rosy by the flickering firelight, and upon it was a lengthy title in huge, ornate capitals, a true story of the revolting and bloody crimes of Sergeant Stanla's USA together with his court-martial and execution. Below this highly promising indication of excitement within, there was a boldly executed woodcut of a full-length human figure. I held it closer to the flames for a clear view. The dress, I saw at once, was the uniform of an American cavalryman of the mid-19th century, shiny riding boots with big spurs, stripe-sided breeches, a brief dragoon jacket, and a round, visored cap. 3 chevrons on the right sleeve proclaimed the man a sergeant, and, even as I noted this my eye caught other and smaller words beneath the picture, Sergeant Stanlaws, from a drawing by the author, and, under this the informative, privately printed, 1848. Price 10 cents. 10 cents? Was it a dime novel after all, one of the earliest of the dime novels, with bloody crime and stern justice? Again I studied the cover illustration. The author-artist had depicted his subject in a pose at once formalized and dashing. The booted, spurred feet were set jauntily apart, the toes pointed outward at what must have been an uncomfortable angle. The right hand was thrust into the front of the dragoon jacket, Napoleon fashion, while the left rested elegantly upon the hilt of the saber strapped around the man's waist. It was all a trifle waxworky and ludicrous. I might have laughed at the picture, except for the face. It was a round face, framed in bushy side whiskers. The eyes beneath the cap visor were large and expressionless, and placed so as to stare out at anybody who looked at the picture. Below and between them jutted a long, straight nose, as thin and sharp as a chisel. The mouth was half open and lipless, and against the darkness of it showed 2 white, pointed upper teeth. The chin, well, there was no chin, or very little. Despite the crudity and stiffness of the woodcut as a whole, there was something of cruel, authentic life about that countenance. I paused to throw more floorboards on the fire, then opened the pamphlet and began to read. In keeping with the style of minor writers of the 18s, the opening strove to be impressive and succeeded only in being flat. It said, rather casually, that one Ivan Stanlaws was born in Prussia near the Polish border in the year 1810, and that he came to the United States as a lad of 12. In 1827, 5 years after his arrival, he enlisted in the army, serving in a dragoon regiment. His record, it appeared, was a good one, even brilliant. The anonymous biographer suggested that had Stanlaws been of American birth, he would have had no trouble in securing an officer's commission. Foreigner as he was, he rose rapidly to the rank of orderly sergeant, what is called sergeant first class today. As such, he did several tours of duty at posts in the South and West. At the outbreak of the Mexican War, he saw active service and won a citation for bravery at Monterey. In 1847, he was the senior non-commissioned officer of a squadron ordered to build and garrison a new fort in the western part of Texas to defend settlers against raiding Comanche Indians. Up to this point, the narrator wrote vaguely, as though information on Sergeant Stanlaws' early career was his only by hearsay. But the incident of the fort building and all that followed was by contrast clear and comprehensive, even vivid. I, reading by the firelight, guessed that the pamphleteer must have made Stanlaws' actual acquaintance at that time. Perhaps the formation of the squadron brought together the units in which the 2 men served. The fort came in for full description as a rectangular stockade of upright logs with sharpened ends, rough barracks and stables in orderly arrangement inside, neat ricks of hay cut on the prairie, troops drilling or on fatigue duty, sentries at their posts, and over all the brilliant stir of the stars and stripes. The Mexican War was at an end, the Indians quiet for the time being. The garrison felt relaxed, even peaceful. But a terror was to come that would dwarf the grimmest adventure of the oldest and most seasoned veteran. The routine of guard duty no longer was boresome. Twice in succession, said the narrative, sentries were found dead in the dawn, or rather, what was left of sentries. The bodies were mangled, mutilated, bloody, their fleshiest parts cut clean away and missing. Hostile Indians was the instant theory of the senior captain who commanded at the fort, and after the second atrocity, an armed search party was sent out to find and punish the enemy. Stamos himself rode with that party, and it was he who found, or appeared to find, a trail. Following him, the Avengers rode for 4 hours across the prairie, and came at last upon an encampment of Comanche hunters. Taken by surprise, a full half of the Indians fell before the first deadly volley of the troopers. The others fled on their swiftest ponies without offering battle. Several wounded Indians were captured and questioned, but all denied attacking the fort, denied even coming near it. They feared, it seemed, a devil that lurked there, something that sneaked and hunted around their campfires by night and devoured women, children, and even full-grown warriors. The soldiers naturally scorned the story as an effort to lie out of killing the sentries and brought back the prisoners, 5 of them. As they approached the fort, said the story, the Indians trembled fearfully. Their wounds were treated and they were placed in the hospital building. On the following morning, one was missing. He was reported escaped despite severe wounds and close guard, and double vigilance was instituted. Another day and night passed, a new sun rose, and a second Indian had vanished. Stamos happened to be sergeant of the guard on this particular morning, and the commander of the garrison, investigating at the hospital, sent for him to come and report. As Stamos entered, the 3 remaining Indians set up a wild and unwarriorly wail of terror. All jabbering and cowering at once, they expressed sudden dread of the sergeant. He, they said, had killed and carried off their comrades. He was the devil of the fort, and he would be their ultimate destroyer. Stamos listened in glaring silence for a moment or two, then broke in on their frantic charges with equally frantic denials. When they pointed at him and accused him again, he whipped out his saber and slashed the nearest Indian across the face. Disarmed by 2 troopers, he was placed under arrest at the commander's order. A search of his quarters followed. Stamos, as senior non-commissioned officer, had a one-room cabin to himself, and the flooring in it proved loose. Reading this part of the story, I glanced down nervously at the vacant space I had torn in the floor of my own shelter. The boards lifted, searchers saw loose earth. A few probing thrusts with a spade discovered the skeletons of the 2 missing Indians, almost entirely stripped of flesh. From this point forward, the narrative grew tense and fascinatingly dire, as if the author was bringing a morbid warmth to his work. Stamos, confronted with the grisly findings, confessed to cannibalism. He had murdered and eaten not only these and other Indians, but the 2 butchered sentries and many other white men and women in the East. How many, he did not know. All he could say was, more than 50, perhaps 100. Explanation he could not or would not give, save that he was tormented by an overpowering and gluttonous hunger for human flesh, particularly the heart and the liver. Facing the court-martial, he pleaded guilty and made a singular request. That speech I returned to later and read it again. If you kill me, burn my body to ashes. Only thus can my soul be redeemed. The officers of the court-martial, they must have been a shocked and pallid gathering past sentence of death. Stamos was placed before a firing squad, to make up which, the pamphlet said, every member of the garrison volunteered. After Stamos had fallen before their volley, the sergeant in charge of the detail walked close to examine him. The bullet-ridden body was seen to move, the eyes slowly opened. Drawing a pistol, the sergeant fired a bullet point-blank through Stamos' brain, and a medical officer, also coming close, pronounced the guilty man dead. The request of Stamos that his body be burned was ignored. It was buried outside the fort at a considerable distance from the military cemetery and was left unmarked. That was the end of the account, at least of the printed part. For at the foot of the final page was a rusty-looking smudge. I drew a brand from the fire to give myself a brighter and more direct light. With difficulty, I made out a single word, written crabbedly and in ink so ancient and faded as to be almost invisible. Fool's I closed the pamphlet and gazed once more at the portrait of Ivan Stanlos upon the cover. As before, the expressionless eyes seemed to stare fixedly at me. Even so, I mused, must the real man's eyes have looked up as his erstwhile fellow sergeant gave him the coup de grace? And the loose, half-open mouth seemed to smile at me as though in mockery. I felt suddenly nauseated with the whole blood-boltered tale. Whether it was true or not I refused to guess. My chief desire was to forget it as much as possible, to find more pleasant reading matter for a lonely night in a strange, storm-bound cabin. Dropping the pamphlet on the floor, I turned my attention to the other papers in my lap. There remained 2 loose sheets or scraps, fastened together with a corroded straight pin. Removing this, I studied the topmost of the 2. It was a roughly torn upper quarter of an inside page from an old newspaper. At the top margin I could make out a fragmentary reading. 7A Eagle, July 11th, 1879. The torn fragment was 3 columns wide and filled with short news items, most of them paragraphs with date lines, the grist of the journal's telegraph mill. To such inner pages might a reader turn leisurely, after he had satisfied a more pressing news hunger with long accounts on the front page of war in Europe or scandal at home. Around one of the items, centrally located on the middle column of the sheet, was drawn a bold circle in dark old ink, as though to direct attention to it. The headline, also included in the circle, was in small type and a column wide. Mercy for soldier murderer. Sergeant Maxim's death sentence is commuted. Beneath this I read, substantially in these words, Fort Fetterman, Wyoming, July 9th. A special order from Army Headquarters was received today, directing that the sentence of Sergeant Wilfred Maxim, previously condemned to death by court-martial, be commuted to life imprisonment. Maxim, who was found guilty of a strange and brutal crime, the killing of a civilian laborer and the drinking of his blood, had been hanged in full view of his regiment here some weeks ago. Pronounced dead and cut down, he revived. When ordered to mount the scaffold to be hanged a second time, he protested that, being once certified deceased, he had paid the full penalty of the crime and should be set free. He was held in arrest while higher authority at Washington was consulted and the commutation of sentence handed down. A special guard will take Maxim to Fort Leavenworth for confinement in the disciplinary barracks. Just below the final paragraph came the juncture of the 2 ends of the line that formed the inked circle, and the pen seemed to have wavered there. No, not exactly. On closer examination I saw that a word had been written there beneath the item, a scrawled, crabbed word. Fools, my hands involuntarily clenched. The crackling of the old paper as it squashed in my grip made me start violently. I frowned in uneasy mystification. Brief as the news story was, and almost deadly dull in its patterned journalistic phraseology, it reeked with unvoiced dread. What was its whole story, its story and that of the pamphlet that told a tale so ghastly parallel? 2 murderers had lived, killing to feed depraved appetites. One was exposed in 1847, the other 32 years later in 1879. Each was an army sergeant. Each killed his fellow man in secret, each was condemned to death, and each proved almost impossible to kill. Each man's sickening story had been published, and some collector of strange and revolting data had found both accounts, had hidden them together under the floor of this old cabin. And each published story had come under the hand of a man who, through scorn or unbelief or macabre humor, had stamped each with the word fools. I pored over the ink circle and the written word on the newspaper. The ink here was faded, too, but not so much as the scrawl in the pamphlet, and the handwriting of the one word was strikingly similar in both. The work of the same penman, then, who had jotted down his judgment each time at the approximate date of the publication. I dropped the half-crumpled fragment of newspaper on the floor beside the pamphlet. The remaining sheet stared up from my knee. It was a simple handbill, once folded small and now falling apart along its smoothed-out creases. It bore bold-faced type, $100 reward, $100 for the capture of Wilfred Maxim, escaped murderer. July 14th, 1879. A description followed as to height, weight, dark hair, and age about 36. So Sergeant Stanloss and Sergeant Maxim, at the times of their respective captures, had been alike in age as well as in profession, rank, and ghastly appetite. I shook myself, as if to dislodge the panic that crept upon the fringes of my consciousness. A corner of the old reward notice drooped heavily. Something was pasted to its back. I turned it over. A photograph looked up at me, a faded and discolored likeness of a uniformed man's head and shoulders. Under it was written Bill Maxim, January 7th, 1872. I knew the crabbed, sprawled handwriting at once. I knew the face, too, but no, that was unbelievable, unspeakable. The soldier's cheeks and jaws were thickly, darkly bearded. I saw the loose mouth in the midst of all that bushy hair. And the eyes were wide and staring under their joined brows. The nose jutted straight and lean and chisel-sharp. I started to say something aloud, but my lips had gone dry and numb. Slowly I stooped to pick up the discarded pamphlet. My hands shook as they held the two portraits toward the flickering light, the photograph and the woodcut. I was sure then, and gasped inarticulately with the fearful knowledge. Ivan Stanloss, shot almost to pieces, could not have rested in his disgraced, unmarked grave. He had struggled up from under that burden of earth, had walked again. He had joined the army under a new name. He had risen again to a sergeancy, and he was caught as before in the act of satisfying his driving cannibal hunger. Better for him had his first court-martial done as he had asked. What were the words? I fumbled back through the pages of the pamphlet. Again I read, "If you kill me, burn my body to ashes. Only thus can my soul be redeemed." A certainty drew in upon me, more terrifying than mystery or darkness or storm. Ancient legends were not legends, they were truth, denied by fear. A werewolf, if killed and left unburnt, would rise from death and rise to be a blood-drinking vampire. With all my hysterical strength, I hurled pamphlet, newspaper, and handbill into the fire. The flames snatched greedily at the dry old sheets, threw up bright tongues before me. Yet I trembled with a chill that was not of the blizzard outside. And a voice, soft as a sigh and fierce as a snarl, spoke from behind my shoulder. "Hoolies?" I sprang up and whirled around. The door was open. A figure stood there, wrapped in a long garment like a cloak, shaking wreaths of snow from its head and shoulders. I gaped, motionless as a charmed bird before a snake. It glided toward the fire. The enveloping robe slid down from the upper part of the figure. I saw a round face, pale as bleached bone. Coarse, bushy hair grew low and rank upon a narrow forehead. Wide, direct eyes fixed mine, gleaming above the thin nose that seemed to point the way for them with its chisel tip. A shallow chin relaxed, a loose, lipless mouth fell open. Two pointed teeth grinned at me.